All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Public Safety, Transportation, and Environment Subcommittee of Budget and Tax. Today, we are hearing three budgets. We're going slightly out of order. First, we're going to hear from the Comptroller of Maryland. Then we are doing Workers' Compensation Commission, and then the Office of Crime Prevention, Youth, and Victim Services. For the Comptroller's budget, we have Mr. Ryan Green, our analyst, and Mr. Green, when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry. So as we can see on the first page, the fiscal 2024 budget decreases by 10 million or 5% to 192 million for the Comptroller's Office. Moving on to Exhibit 1 on page 4, we can see that the number of personal income tax returns processed electronically increases, and that the number of paper returns processed in paper decreases. This is due in part due to the portion of returns processed in fiscal 2021 reflecting returns that were filed for the previous fiscal year. Moving on to page 5 for Exhibit 2. We can see that there's been a 58% increase in collections on unpaid income tax cases and a 17% increase for collections on delinquent business tax cases, due in part to Comptroller returning to pre-pandemic levels of activity. Moving on to Exhibit 3 on page 6, there's been a $232 million decrease in it decreases to the unclaimed property reported and paid decreases to $232 million or 6% compared to fiscal 2022. Moving on to page 7, the fiscal 2024 budget includes one proposed deficiency for the Comptroller's Office for fiscal 2023 that would provide $3.5 million to fund economic impact stimulus payments provided under the Relief Act, Chapter 39 of 2021. The Relief Act mandated economic impact payments of $500 to resident taxpayers who claimed the state earned income tax credit in fiscal 2019, and the proposed deficiency would provide the final funding for these payments. Looking at Exhibit 4 on page 8, for an overview of agency spending, we can see that the majority of agency spending, 60%, is for personnel, with the Annapolis Data Center, contractual services, the integrated tax system, major IT project, and other allocations making up the rest of their expenses. Moving on to Exhibit 5 on page 9 for a breakdown of their budget increases, which continues on page 10. We can see that personnel their increases in funding for personnel around 10 million, with decreases everywhere else that total 20 million. This is due in part to decreases in funding for the ITS project, primarily due to reimbursable funds, which will be discussed in issue 2 of this analysis. Moving on to personnel on page 11. We can see that as of December 31st, 2022, the Comptroller's Office has 121.7 vacant positions, or 11.3% of total positions, which is a decrease of 25.3 from the same time last year. Even with the reductions in the number of vacant positions, the Comptroller's Office still has more than double the number of positions needed to meet the budget turnover level. The Comptroller should comment on whether it is experiencing issues filling vacancies and what efforts it is undertaking to improve recruitment and retention. Additionally, the fiscal 2024 allowance adds 23 regular positions for the Comptroller's Office. These positions include 17 new positions in revenue administration and 6 new positions in general administration. Of these, 10 will be working on matters related to income tax processing, which is discussed in issue 1. 7 will be working to support the new legal division created by Chapter 481 of 2022, which will provide expanded and detailed tax guidance to taxpayers. And 6 will be working to fulfill an initiative of the Comptroller to reorganize the management structure to create more accountability and accessibility for the office. Moving on to page 12 for issue 1. There is income tax data reporting delays in fiscal 2023. The Comptroller produces a report annually that details information on each county's income tax data, which is used for the calculation of certain funding formulas in the state budget. The Comptroller's Office published the report in December 2022, but delays in processing certain income tax returns led to revised data being published in January 2023. One significant change was that the January data showed a 20% increase in county revenues, while the December data only reflected an 8.5% increase. This substantially impacts the data used in the calculation of several funding formulas, including the disparity grant formula. The comptroller has indicated that 10 of the 23 new positions added in the fiscal 2024 allowance, 8 revenue examiners and 2 revenue specialists, are being dedicated to addressing the delayed processing of tax returns. The comptroller should comment on the data reporting delays and the steps being taken in addition to the new positions to prevent this from happening again in the future. Moving on to issue 2, also on page 12. The integrated tax system, also called the COMPASS program, seeks to unify the state of Maryland tax system and the computer assisted collection system. Committee narrative in the 2022 Joint Chairman's Report requested information on the ITS project. In its response, the Comptroller's Office stated that the project would need to be restructured in terms of scope, schedule, and cost. Ultimately, this was driven by aggressive planning at the outset of the project, a lack of sufficient staffing, and the general disruption brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition to other factors impacting the project timeline, changes in state law, including the potential taxation of cannabis and the introduction of graduated local income tax rates, have required ongoing changes to the plans for the project. Altogether, the rebaselining will add 2 years to the project timeline from fiscal 2025 to 2027 and increase the total cost by $31 million from $159 million to $190 million. However, the Comptroller's independent verification and validation team has indicated the project is still on track to complete implementation in fiscal 2026. The Comptroller should clarify when it anticipates the project being completed. Additionally, given the substantial changes in timeline, project cost, and scope, DLS recommends continuing to track ITS project development and activities and expenditures through quarterly reports. Moving on to page 13. Committee narrative in the 2022 Joint Chairman's Report requested that the Comptroller's Office submit a report on developing a newborn savings account program, also known as baby bonds, in the state of Maryland. It looked at other jurisdictions, such as in Connecticut and Washington, D.C., as well as evaluating options for administration. The Comptroller identified 3. A partnership between the State Treasurer's Office and the Comptroller's Office, in which the Treasurer invests the funds and the Comptroller authorizes payments from the fund, tasking Maryland 529 with the management and oversight of the newborn savings accounts, given their experience with managing investment accounts, and the expansion of the Save for College state contribution grant program to allow for the automatic enrollment of qualified newborns, which would limit the use of funds to education. The Comptroller's Office recommended that if the legislature desired ongoing contributions to be available, that it be structured similar to Maryland 529's Maryland College Investment Plan. Additionally, for participation, the Comptroller indicated that automatic enrollment using Medicaid information would be the best way to maximize participation, which is consistent with programs developed by Connecticut and Washington, D.C. However, the Comptroller noted that program eligibility could also be expanded to cover families not enrolled in Medicaid, but who would qualify otherwise based on income. Looking at Exhibit 6 on page 16, the Comptroller estimated 4 scenarios and the costs as well as the benefits for each of the scenarios. Scenario 1, a $3,200 one-time payment at birth. Scenario 2, a $2,000 one-time payment at birth. Scenario 3, a $1,000 one-time payment at birth. And then scenario 4 with a $1,000 payment into an account every year for the child's until the child is 18. Here we can see that the highest benefit for the child would be that the $1,000 payment every year, which would also have the highest cost. The final pages of the report contain the exact wording for the requested reports, as well as additional appendices related to the Comptroller's Office. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Questions for our analyst? Senator Rosepep.
Yeah, I have a general question that I've been meaning to ask on all these reports under personnel, where it says turnover and necessary vacancies excluding new positions. I'm trying to understand the definition of that exactly. The new positions refer to new positions in the in the future year budget as opposed to the current budget. What does new position mean?
I could get back to you on that one.
Okay, yeah, that's one question. Second question is turnover and necessary vacancies. Same question. I don't really understand. I understand what the words mean, but I don't understand the significance of it in all these reports. So if you could get back to us on that, that'd be great.
I could do that, yes.
I got one other question, and that's on the previous page. Under other changes, there's a line that says multi-state tax auditing subscription. Do you know what that is?
I would be happy to pass that to the agency to clarify.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I'm looking at the comptroller and I think she's going to be prepared to answer that question.
I presume so.
Okay, Madam Comptroller, please, and whoever from your team you'd like. Good to see you.
Good to see you all. I've never been in this room before. It's so
The secret room.
exciting. Yeah, it's secret. Yeah. No, it's really an honor to be here with all of you. Thank you so much for taking the time. Thanks for your questions. And I'm excited to present to you. Today I have with me our Chief of Staff, Rihanna Matthews-Brown, and our Chief Deputy Comptroller, Andy Schaffel, who many of you know. You should have a PowerPoint on your desk. Feel free to follow along. I'm so grateful to be here today. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to respond to the budget analysis. And thank you, Mr. Green, our budget analyst, for his work and his diligence. There was a lot of back and forth, and I appreciate all his questions. So I was just in front of your full committee a few weeks ago discussing the state of the agency, where I presented some opportunities for our agency, including improving the employee experience, modernizing the office, reimagining our impact. And I'm not going to go through all of that again today, but I think it's important to highlight a few of the things because some of them came up in the analysis as well. And so I just want to make sure to just hit a few points home so that you understand what is going on in the agency. Yep. So first, I just want to talk about the physical environment. When we talk about improving the employee experience, of course, this goes to filling vacancies. Mr. Vice Chair, just so you know, every agency is told what the number of vacancies we have to keep in our agency by DBM. So even though it might look like we have 100 vacancies, DBM requires us to keep 50 of those positions vacant for turnover. So actually we have 50 vacancies. So that's what the second one of the questions that you had to the analyst meant. It's that's what DBM requires us to keep vacant, basically. So I just did want to go through really briefly on your second or third page of your slide, the physical environment of the comptroller's office. Huge need for improved salaries, challenges with hiring, retention, and the lack of good facilities. I will mention one new fact that we have about our facilities. I went through, we have about $10 million of deferred maintenance, but from DGS that dates back to 1996. That includes even things like cleaning our air ducts. But right now we actually have to send people home who work in the top floor of our buildings because we have bats in our building. There's a bat colony that lives in the RAD building, and you can see a bat right there. And it's of course a public health concern. They have rabies. So we're working with DGS to help clear them out, but they are endangered species and it's really challenging. And it's sort of both hilarious and terrible, right? Like that this is the state of our buildings here in Annapolis. We've explained, you also might have seen the Treasury building, which is one of 3 buildings that we have in Annapolis, was supposed to be renovated in the FY25 budget. It's been pushed back to FY28. So we explained to DGS that present conditions are not acceptable and that we cannot wait until basically what would end up being, 2030 to have some of these renovations done. The bathrooms in our building are original to the building, for instance. They are very old. And so we are working with the treasurer, I might add, who also, of course, inhabits the building with his employees to present to DGS the funding that needs to happen to make sure that the building can move forward. So there will be a supplemental request to DGS that will come through DGS's budget, but which we'll ask for our buildings. I also want to just reemphasize that though we now have an opportunity, I think as a single government, to strengthen this somewhat depleted agency, improve the quality of services that we provide to the public, and also, and I think this is important, really ensure timely and full implementation of the General Assembly's policy reforms. At its core, the Comptroller's Office is a revenue producing agency, right? We're responsible for every dollar in and every dollar out of the state. And dollars invested in the agency are not only returned as revenue, but they also result in an improved taxpayer experience and a better business climate for our state. And that, and of course, an adaptability to a quickly changing and ever more digital world of finance. So when we say, please invest in our office, we really mean that, right? When we only have 4 corporate auditors, it means that we can only audit a very, very few number of businesses in the state to make sure that we're actually complying with the laws that you all as a General Assembly set. Just a quick overview of the agency. We have about 1,000 dedicated employees spread between 15 divisions and split among Annapolis, Baltimore, and 11 regional field offices. After an initial reorganization, we've divided the work of the Comptroller's Office among 4 deputy comptrollers and a soon-to-be hired chief information officer, a CIO. So not only do we oversee all the IT in the office, we also run the Annapolis Data Center, which supports multiple agencies across the state government. And yet we've never had a CIO. So it's really important that we bring on a CIO, that we have a CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer, to make sure we're keeping up with cybersecurity threats. And so as the analyst mentioned, that's part of what is in the new budget for some of our new positions. So the Comptroller's Office really plays many vital roles in the functions of Maryland's government and in the day-to-day lives of the people who live and work here. And our goal each and every day is to do the work that it takes to build communities that are more equitable, more resilient, and more prosperous. Now to respond to the comments from DLS. So DLS first asked us to comment on whether we're experiencing issues filling vacancies and what efforts we are taking to improve recruitment and retention. So like any other customer-oriented agency, our people are our greatest asset. And as you saw there in the pie chart, they are the bulk of our budget. So my first priority in this testimony and as comptroller is to make sure that we focus on our people. And when it comes to improving the employee experience, there are 3 key focuses among the comptroller's rank and file teammates: increased compensation, training and support, and improving the physical environment. So actually, with current commitments from recent interviewees, we now have 97 vacancies out of 1,083. So we're down from 119 vacancies last July, and many of those are in the past month. And like I said to Vice Chair Rosapap, given that DBM requires us to keep about 50 open, we're only at about 47 vacancies, many of which we are actively interviewing for and making offers on. So really, frankly, pretty impressive for an agency of our size to have this few number of vacancies. And I think goes to show just how desperate we are for PINs and people. Still, we recognize there's more that we can do and in fact should be doing to ensure that we're filling PINs quickly to support our key agency priorities. So as part of this effort, we've begun a process to identify all PINs within the agency that have been vacant without any movement for over 150 days. And then we plan to reallocate those PINs to address other agency priorities. We recently conducted an employee survey of the entire agency and had a response rate of over 70%, which is pretty incredible. Early analysis demonstrates that employees are frustrated that they're underpaid. They'd like more training opportunities. They'd like access to parking. This is actually a huge issue in Annapolis for government employees because of the I'm not sure if it's statutory or regulatory, but DGS is only allowed to allot a certain number of parking spots per agency. They have a special ratio that they use. And Annapolis, it assumes that there's a robust public transit system. And there isn't, I'm sad to say. And so we just don't allocate nearly enough parking for employees. And that's a huge issue here. You know, if you have to park at the Naval Yard all year and you're a parent and you have to get out to pick up your kids or take them to the doctor's appointment, whatever, it adds 45 minutes to your commute and it's really unsustainable. To address some of these issues, we've created a position of Chief Equity and Transformation Officer. The CEDO is working with HR and we are hiring a training director as of July 1. One is budgeted for. I will note, unlike the judiciary, unlike DLS, unlike the General Assembly, unlike the state police and all of MDOT, we do not have a separate salary schedule, the Comptroller's agency. If we had a separate salary schedule, we could reclass the pay for our revenue examiners, for our tax attorneys, and for other specialized employees to the amount that they should be paid versus their colleagues in local and federal government. So I just wanted to make sure that you all are aware of that as well. And I'll also note that despite the fact that our population as a state is growing and we have much more complicated tax situations, our agency not only hasn't grown in the number of pins that it's been allocated, it has shrunk. So not counting the ATC positions that were taken, we have lost 40 positions, 40 pins in the last 5 years or so. We need to earn those positions back and we need to grow, especially with cannabis coming. And as we'll talk about next, the pass-through entity, complicated tax situations that we have, it takes more people to do this work. Okay, next, another request for comment by DLS was related to the disparity grants formula, which involves a report that is utilized by the Department of Budget and Management, DBM, and based on tax returns. So the disparity grant formula that we all know in our education formulas, all of these formulas are dependent on one really important report that the comptroller prepares every year that goes over our net taxable income, the NTI of every county. That data is used to calculate disparity grants, education formula, and more. And when the General Assembly passed a bill a few years ago in response to the Trump tax cuts, that is a SALT tax sort of pass-through entity workaround, it allowed businesses to pay taxes on behalf of their resident owners. That enables the business to deduct the taxes as expenses, hence the federal tax workaround, but those taxes paid by the business must then be added back on each owner's personal income tax return and claimed as a refundable credit. Super complicated. That's why I have to read it word for word to make sure I don't get it wrong. So there are so many steps that have to be taken by the comptroller's office to make sure that we get this right. We have to connect the business return with the personal returns. We have to verify the business credit matches the credit. We have to verify the business is indeed paid what they said they claimed. We had to verify the add back. We have to verify the credit. And then we have to redo that for other business holdings of the individual. This ensures the revenue neutrality of the policy while also protecting state dollars from fraud. And this is not a small amount of money we're talking about. The average credit for tax paid by a pass-through entity last year was $55,000. So if we mess up one, it really starts affecting the state's coffers. So many filers who use this methodology file their taxes at the end of the period in October. And because of the complexity of calculating whether the tax liability of each person had been paid, it takes an incredible amount of time to do this. So that report that I mentioned early on, usually that report comes out in November, and then DBM uses that report for calculating the disparity grants and the education formula as they're finishing the budget. However, that report was not done this year until January. There were preliminary numbers available in November, and there was a miscommunication about the fact that they were preliminary numbers, but the full report wasn't done until January. And so then all of the disparity grant formulas had to be recalculated to have the full and complete numbers. So an initial request to the governor in December, right before Christmas, we did request an additional team of people to be able to process and be dedicated to handling these PTEs. That thankfully was granted, recognizing the challenge. So we anticipate going forward that we will be able to meet the November deadline moving forward so that this will not happen again. So that's good. And then finally, DLS asked us to clarify when we anticipate the Compass project being completed. I think I said this in full committee, but it's worth restating that Louis Goldstein used to say that he was proud that he brought the comptroller's office from pencil and paper to the mainframe. And now it is time to move us from the mainframe to the cloud. And that is what we are trying to do with the Compass system. We have some of the oldest systems in the nation, and that means we have an unbelievable opportunity in front of us to modernize the tools of this office to go from being the oldest to the newest. So a core function of the agency, revenue collection, is hindered by an aging technology infrastructure. So our current system is ironically named SMART, and it is very old and it is DOS-based, and it is neither nimble nor user-friendly. The agency contracted in 2019 to bring in a company called RSI to bring a new integrated tax system. The contract, frankly, was poorly conceived, woefully mismanaged, and has never met a single target date. The team needed to ensure that the processes undertaken by the comptroller staff could be translated so that developers could integrate them into a new system was never fully assembled. In order to meet those original dates, we would need 75 new skilled employees. Clearly, that is not going to happen. Therefore, the Chief Deputy Comptroller and I are working to realign our timeline with RSI. We've brought in a new project management organization, Sarah Gore, who's working with us on it. And the additional time on the contract will require additional funding, but it is moving along and we are renegotiating the contract right now. We just had a meeting last week with them. And when we have the new deadline and the new contract, we will share it with the General Assembly so they have all of this information. The good news is that when this is done, it will be great. Taxpayers will have a new online portal where they'll be able to do almost all their tax and license transactions online with the expert help of employees. And it will just be very helpful for viewing payment history, balances, updating info, setting up payment plans, and more. So it'll feel much more like what you and I are used to when we interact with our bank or other online financial agencies. So I just want to conclude with a few tax facts, which I thought might be interesting for you to take home to your constituents and others. So tax season opened in January and tax returns are due on April 18th. As of last week, we'd had 507,887 tax returns filed. That's about 17% of the total tax returns that we expect to get. So we have a long ways to go. We know we can break it down by county. We can't just do district, but we can do county. So Allegheny is in the lead. Somerset is a close second. Montgomery is last. Howard is second to last. So the numbers really track prior year trends because more affluent jurisdictions tend to lag behind those where taxpayers file as early as possible to get their tax refunds. We also just want to mention, we have a large number of people who still file by paper. Like we collect cash in the office. People send cash in. This is a problem. And we need to really keep moving towards moving people online. Not only is it safer and more secure for the taxpayer, it's safer and more secure for us as a state and as an agency. And we've only seen slight changes around the margins in terms of the number of people who've been filing online versus in paper. I just want to point out something that we've talked with Mr. Green. There was a key observation in the DLS analysis where they said that since fiscal 2022, paper tax returns fell by 32%, while electronic tax returns are up 5%. Actually, the reason that those numbers look like that is because the tax year is different than the fiscal year. And we pushed the tax filing deadline to July the last couple of years. So it looked like more people were filing online than actually had. But in reality, electronic filing has increased from 89% to 91%, while paper filings have decreased from 11% to 9%. So we haven't seen those huge variations. And then finally, you might be interested in this chart. It sort of creates a tabulation of who pays Maryland's income tax. The report helps the reader, I think, understand the tax base and ideally make informed judgments regarding policy. It is just a snapshot, so you can't see everything, but you'll see, for instance, the top 0.01%, 280 households. Their cumulative share of the total AGI is 4%, and their cumulative share of total net Maryland income tax is 5%. Well, the income tax is the majority, with sales tax of what we collect, our revenue. And so these 280 families have a very outsized influence on the amount of money that we bring in every year, but they don't respond to normal sort of economic forecasting, right? We don't know what these 280 families, what's going on in these 280 families' lives, what decisions they're going to make that will impact the amount of taxes that they owe from year to year. But I think this is an interesting and helpful chart, and we're happy in future meetings to go over it with you all to explain it in more detail. So I'll just conclude by saying, at the core of every adjustment to the Comptroller's office is the goal of creating a more equitable, more resilient, and more prosperous state. I appreciate your time and partnership in this effort and look forward to working with you all to make sure this agency is living up to all of our needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Comptroller. So a couple notes before I open up to questions. Number one, we actually had a bat in this building at the beginning of session. So Treasury Building is not alone.
It's crazy.
I was here on a Sunday, I was flying around. And secondly, I hear you loud and clear about parking. And as a senator from Annapolis, love to work with you on finding a solution to that.
Oh, okay. Yes. Thank you. That makes sense. Yes. We're very excited for the new city parking lot to open.
Yes.
And provide some more flexibility, hopefully, too.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Senator Jackson.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to the, as Senator Miller used to say, the Senate of Maryland. It is a different look from our House days.
Yes,
That's
yes.
for sure.
Yep.
So congratulations, by the way. And
Thanks.
so you mentioned that the HVAC systems over in your building, your ventilation systems weren't cleaned out, not even during COVID.
No,
Wow.
there's no
Wow.
record of them have been cleaned out in the past few
It's
years at
interesting
all.
because we will be receiving an after action report from those folks. It'll be interesting to see what they've done to the government buildings that we have here.
Yeah,
It's also great to hear that you served on the Joint Cyber Committee, and so a little familiar with how compartmentalized our cyber systems are for our state.
mhm.
And glad to see you all picking up the CIO. And lastly, I think it's duly noted the separate salary schedule. I think that creates a lot of issues, and I think that's probably something that we're going to be taking a look at a lot of salary schedules
Yeah.
this coming year. So thank you for that information. So
Sure, of course.
and that's it.
Thank you. And I just let you know, we have been working with Chip at the state CISO, and I had meetings with him in November and December. And some of the very first actions that I took as comptroller were opting us, the comptroller's agency, in to the rest of the cybersecurity work that every other agency has been doing. We had been exempted from things, and I was like, no, don't exempt us anymore. We want to be a part of this. We have,
We've had too many exemptions.
Yep.
So it's kind of hard to get a hold of that as we move forward. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. Great
Thank
seeing
you. And I forgot, Andy can certainly talk about the audit issue too, if you want to talk the multi-state audit software. Do you want to mention that?
Sure, happy to. We subscribe to a service, which is what that item is, with the Multi-State Tax Commission. The concept is that all of us states need to audit the very large corporations, but we all benefit from one audit as opposed to each doing our own audits. So it's almost like a subscription service, and we kind of outsource some of the major, Fortune 500 corporate audits.
When you say subscription, it sounds like a publication.
No, just that we are a part of it. We subscribe to being a part of this network.
So we participate in joint audits in the joint audit program of the MTC.
That's correct.
Can you provide some, not right now, but provide some data on that?
Mhm.
How many
Sure.
audits, how much money, what periods of time,
Yeah.
just kind of an update on all that stuff?
Absolutely.
That
Yeah.
would be great. I do want to come back to my lack of understanding of this vacancy stuff, though. It says excluding new positions. This is on page 13 of the analyst report. Does new positions mean positions that you are getting in FY24? Is that what new positions means?
That's my understanding of what it means. It could mean something else, but my understanding is that those aren't included because even though we know they're coming,
Yeah.
we can't.
I
we
thought that
can't
might be one, but I
hire.
just want to be
Yeah,
clear.
Yep.
But then this turnover and necessary vacancies. I mean, you said DBM says you have to do that, but do you understand the concept?
I mean,
I
it's,
don't. Help me.
so, I mean, Wayne, our finance person can ask it, but basically my understanding is that when a PIN becomes vacant, or it sometimes can take a while for a PIN to be vacant when you need to hire somebody. And so they ask us to keep some PINs vacant for potential turnover. So when we're hiring people, there's more flexibility. I haven't dug into why DBM wants us to do that
No,
or how they set the
If
number.
that's the concept, that
But,
helps explain.
Yeah, that's,
And Andy, you want to say something?
No, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, even in a perfect, fully functioning
Yeah.
employment environment, you have churn.
Yeah.
And they're trying to make sure we don't get over budgeted for the churn. Right? Because we know we're going to have vacant positions, even in a perfect world. And so therefore, don't pay us in our budget.
we
for it as a
don't
vacant
have enough
position.
money in our budget for every position to be filled 365 days a year. And so our budget is based on keeping a certain number of vacancies at all times. And if we were to fill every PIN next week,
Yeah.
we would be way over budget. And so those PINs, I mean, it's a little bit interesting because those PINs aren't real. It feels
Right,
like they're not real
that's what I'm
PINs.
trying to get at. So basically, but it goes to the question of whether you have enough pins.
Right. Well, we don't think we do.
I know. I understand that. Okay.
Yeah. And part of it is because, we are supposed to keep a certain
Yeah.
number empty at all time.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yep, so
Thank you on that. I want to come back to some of the broader questions on workforce though. So where are your vacancies primarily? In what jobs?
It's a good question, and we can send you an analysis. What we've been looking at right now is where the vacancies are where the long-term vacancies are. Some of our long-term vacancies are in compliance. Some of them are in IT because frankly, of low salaries, it's hard to hire the kind of people with the qualifications that are required for the job at the salaries that we pay. We do have a few vacancies right now, but they're not long-term ones in taxpayer services. So we're recruiting a new head of our Frederick office, a new head of our Salisbury office. We need a couple people in Greenbelt. I think we need somebody in Wheaton. So there are a few taxpayer services positions that are open right now as well. But I have a nice big spreadsheet color coded for how long they've been vacant to look at. And also, we keep up very closely with HR on where we are in the interview process. Sometimes it can be difficult to fill because maybe you've gotten 2 interested applicants and they're both qualified. Well, DBM requires us to have 3 interested applicants before we can interview anybody. So we have to reopen the job listing to try to get 3 applicants. So there are some sort of existing strange regulations that make it a slower process, and then we might lose somebody because they go someplace else.
What is the normal time from you trying to recruit somebody to getting somebody on the job?
It depends on the job.
I'm sure that's true,
Yeah.
but
But it is way too long because a lot of these
Yeah.
required regulations. I mean, if I had to put an average from like the day we open up advertisement for a position, it's probably anywhere from 90 to 120 days on average because of how long we have to keep the posting out there and then the interview process and the background check process.
gotcha. Okay.
That's a challenge.
That's something we got to fix.
Yeah, no,
we totally have to fix that. That's
Yes.
ridiculous.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It makes people who are eager to start, in a few weeks.
We'll go
we're like,
someplace else. I mean,
tot-
no one's going to wait around for 6 months for a job.
Nobody, and especially now with the IRS, because they are hiring 85,000 new
Yeah,
agents.
yeah.
We are going to lose so many people.
So you got like 1,000 employees plus or minus?
Mhm. Yes.
So other than auditors and lawyers, what percent of your jobs require college degrees?
Not many.
Yeah, I mean.
We substitute college degrees for experience for many of them for taxpayer services. It might be that sort of the manager of a field office requires a college degree, but then nobody else in the office has to have one. For revenue specialists, I can't remember. Revenue specialists don't need a college degree. We can, and we train people. So there are many that don't.
Did you all do, before you got there, Andy, did you guys do the review that the Governor Hogan asked for about the degree requirements?
Yeah, we were already kind of ahead of that.
Gotcha.
We've been trying to work this system to the best of our ability without being egregious.
Gotcha.
For quite some time.
I got one last question, and it goes to before your time, Madam Controller. I noticed that the controller is on the board of the 529 plan. And we've had some problems with the 529 plan, as you know.
Mhm.
Is there someone in the controller's office who, and maybe it was Peter,
Mhm.
who is really being the board member and paying attention to the 529 in the controller's office? My question. I'm not trying to spread blame. I want to talk to someone who's knowledgeable is really why I'm asking the question.
Sure. So there was somebody who attended the meetings as part of like 10 other things that he did. So
Mhm.
didn't really have the opportunity to dig in. But we have a new deputy comptroller for policy, public works and investment, Ben Siegel, and he's been tracking it and really digging in on what's going on. So I'd be happy to have him talk with you sometime about it.
That would be great. What I mentioned, I met with the staff last week, and what I'm trying to understand is why they made the decision to do the give money back program the way they did.
Right. And actually the comptroller's office voted against that.
Well, that's good to know too. That's
Yeah.
the history I want to try to understand.
Yeah.
if you
So
have-
the
that'd be great.
comptroller, I think, might have been the lone
Wow.
vote against that because they were
That's
concerned
good. Well,
about
that's
how
good.
it
That's
would
good to know.
happen.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Sure.
Thanks a lot, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. I think we could dig into that one all day long. I'm gonna go back, Madam Comptroller, because I think there's a couple pieces here that we are gonna need to follow up with DBM about the vacancy rate issue calculation. Clearly hiring and
Mhm.
getting people through that hiring process faster. We're not gonna solve the governor's 50% reduction in vacancy rate without, that's a key
Yep.
piece of it. And then your separate salary schedule issue, just if you can help us understand that, Madam, is that something you request of DBM? Something we tell DBM we want from them?
It has to be in statute.
Has to be in
state law.
statute.
So MDOT, number of other agencies have separate salary schedules. So that's something when we've been throwing out all sorts of different ideas. And that's one of the ideas that we've been throwing out as a way to just as a way to make sure that we have more control over the people that we're hiring and to stay competitive. And actually DBM in its 2022 report to the Joint Chairman's Committee recommended that as something to look into, whether there should be separate salary schedules. So that's, yep. So they put it in their report.
Yet we don't have a piece of legislation that would carry that.
No, not right now. Nope.
Okay.
Yeah.
Something we should note for future. Are you following up to that question? All right, Senator Risbett.
The DVM thing from 2022, was that just about the controller's office or about agencies more
It was
broadly?
about all agencies. Yeah. So that it was about all agencies. It's a great report. I'm happy to send it to you. It was
Yeah,
really
I'd like to see it.
interesting.
Yeah.
Actually DLS, Jason sent it to us. So,
Great.
he can give it to you
That'd
too.
be great.
So yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
really interesting though.
Senator Sullivan.
Thank you. And thank you, Madam Controller. I know it seems like in every hearing, we have problems with getting the personnel in position, getting just people there to work for you. What are maybe priority positions that you say you really need? Because I know positions are hard just to fill, but maybe priority ones that you really need. And maybe there's some areas, because we've looked in our community colleges and other areas, we could pick up some of those employees for the
Yep.
department.
Yep.
Is there some way that we could work together and help that out?
We'd
'Cause
love
we
to.
would love to do that.
Yeah, no, we'd love to do that. And actually, I think, following up with Maryland Association of Community Colleges is on my list. But for instance, I'll say right now, I think we as a state have a really big opportunity to hire IT personnel, right? As as big tech companies are laying off, we have the opportunity to say, hey, let's make sure that there are state opportunities that are well advertised, decently paid, and communicated to those types of people who might have been laid off. Working with our community colleges to make sure that we have that pipeline is really important as well. I think that IT is a huge area where we could be doing more and bringing more in-house, right? We farm out and bring in contractors for so much of the IT work that has to happen in every state agency. I just don't just mean like the comptroller's office. And I think that there's a way to do more in the tech space. Yep. So I'm sure there are other places as well, but I'll say right now, the starting salary for a lawyer at the comptroller's office is $57,000. We're just never going to be able to hire a lawyer who can do tax law for $57,000. So there's, you can offer them more pensions, you can offer them parking, but at the end of the day, you just got to raise some people's salaries too, so we can hire people. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's keep pulling on the thread. So you mentioned that you're going to be able to reclass some pins after more review, but you won't be able to say increase that starting salary for your attorney from 57 to what you need without.
Yeah, that's basically how it works.
Right. We lose opportunity there. We can move some things around, but we just squeeze people further up. That's the
Right.
point, I think, of the separate salary schedule is, last year DBM's worked with us around the fringes. We boosted pay for about half of our employees, our entry level positions and up, but we keep squeezing there and it's not sustainable.
Okay. All right. Let's keep talking about this, moving in as we put the budget together. Okay. IT, also consistent theme in this subcommittee and across state government. I think maybe it was a little bit of a blessing in disguise for that delay, but happy that you are taking a look again at that contract and building something custom that's going to work for us.
Yeah, we're excited about what it'll be.
Okay. Can I ask a couple questions just of pet projects, just because Andy, you've been working on this for a long time. A lot of us represent municipalities who don't have the revenue projection skill and talent that you and your staff have. Have you been able to work with municipalities in particular on helping to project that revenue?
We've put it out there that we are happy to engage with them. We can't necessarily do their projections, but we can help them, give them all the information they need
Okay.
and support them along the way.
Okay.
And we've certainly made those offers. We haven't had a lot subscribing or jumping in, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
To the offer.
Good to know. I appreciate you being willing to help. I'm going to reemphasize to my two municipalities, they should reach out. Okay.
And I'll also add, we've never had an intergovernmental affairs director in the agency before, and we now have one, Eve Schumann,
Oh, wonderful.
who has been reaching out to MML. And I was at the Maryland Mayors Association meeting last Friday, and she was with me to make sure that they understand if they need something, they should reach out.
Good to know, especially as they're pulling their budgets together now. Okay. And last pet project, we discussed this last year, Madam Comptroller, when you were delegate, but this unified need-based financial aid situation we have in the state where, kids from the neediest families unfortunately have to go back and forth with MHEC over need-based financial aid, get their parents to send tax returns, all these things that are very difficult when frankly, MHEC should be able to just talk to you.
Yep.
Right. Any progress on that?
That hasn't come to us yet. MHEC has not been in discussions with us about that. So maybe when whoever the new final MHEC secretary is, we can restart those discussions. But yeah, I think this goes along with, we're able to share information if we have information sharing agreements, especially within state government, it's easier. And I'm happy to work with MHEC. We worked a lot on state financial aid last year and gave a big boost. So happy to do that. It makes a ton of sense.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any pet projects for the comptroller? Okay. And then speaking about your need and you're going to give us moving forward, once you reevaluate your PIN situation, really what you're going to need to be everything you need to be.
Yeah, I don't know if it'll be everything we need to be because some of that depends on what bills get passed, but certainly we've, articulated to DLS our needs on cannabis, what we need to get done. We will submit something to you this week on what we believe we need moving forward right now, just to sort of get to where, frankly, to make up for some lost ground over the past few years and where we should be based on where we are. And so we will certainly get you that this week. And I'm working with the treasurer, of course, as well on all our facilities work. So
wonderful.
Yep.
Senator Roosevelt.
Yeah. Where does all that fit into your discussion when you were with the full committee about tax gap?
So that is a good question. A lot of that's in compliance. So for instance, this morning I met with Secretary Wu from the Department of Labor, and we were talking about, that we need to sort of restart the workplace fraud work group so that we can go over, whether it's unemployment insurance claims that, audits that result in tax findings that they can send to us, or it's wage and hour theft that they can report to us and we can go do audits. All of this sort of like larger looks at industries and places where there's illegal behavior happening. If you're willing to defraud the government in one way, you're probably willing to defraud the government in another way. And so that's part of it, is that enforcement piece. Another is, frankly, looking at the online economy. Whether it's NFTs or somebody who rents, 10 Airbnbs in Ocean City or sells, thousands of dollars of jewelry on Etsy, how we're able to capture that as well is really important. And then finally, I think through both multi-state audits, working on the biggest corporations, but making sure that we have setting up a more sophisticated audit program for some of our biggest corporations as well. They can hire big accounting and tax law firms, and we need to be able to both compete and keep up with what they're doing. And I will say right now we have 4 corporate auditors. We are not. So I think over the next few months, my goal is to work with Andy and our compliance team to really see where the holes are and what other states are doing that's working well, and then present that to the governor for next year's budget. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I almost forgot my question to ask of everybody in front of us. You touched on it briefly, appreciating that you're a month on the job. Where would you like to be in terms of your vacancy rate this time when we meet next year?
Great. Well, I will assume that we're going to be, receiving more PINs in the July 1st budget. And right now we are at 97 vacancies. And my hope would be that we would, be at least to 75 or 60, based on, we'll also be adding new PINs. So that's hiring a lot of people between now and next January. But we're excited. I feel like people are excited about the agency and where it's going. And, I say we're trying to even work around the edges on small things to make it easier to manipulate the when you look at job apps, the DBM site that has the centralized, all the job applications, it's like the first thing it'll say is Administrator 4, Comptroller of Maryland. Like, who knows what the Administrator 4 is? So I recently asked DBM, can you put like Investments Director or Revenue Examiner as like what the actual job title is? And so they said they're going to be working with us to, update titles so that people actually can see what it is and it's cleaner and easier to look at. So there are just even little basic things like that I think we can do better at, that we've started to identify for DBM.
Very exciting. Senator Roosevelt.
One more. How do you recruit?
Good question. We don't have a big budget. I mean, this is one thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about people's budgets and we're thinking about planning for agency budgets. So for instance, we have a small budget for going to recruiting fairs. We post things online. I've started posting things on LinkedIn. The comptroller office now has a page on LinkedIn, so they can post on LinkedIn. For instance, we got a notification about a Coppin State University job fair that's happening in a few weeks. Costs money, it costs time, but we're going to try to make sure that we can go to that, right? I mean, but these are things where you have to have a staff person who can pick up, who can go, who has marketing materials, who has everything that they need to like go to those types of places, and you have to pay the entrance fee as well. So we're trying to actually set aside some money to do that. We also are really interested. I never thought I'd say this, but the revenue agency in Washington State made this really cool like recruitment video. And so we're looking at how we can up our game on social media and with videos to share about the different types of jobs that exist in the agency. I mean, there's just so many different types of things you can do in the comptroller's office, and there's so many different work locations, and we should be selling that more. So there's a number of different ways that we do it, but there's certainly more to do.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You and your team.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Appreciate you all. Sorry for taking so long.
We're thorough. Okay, next we have Workers' Compensation Commission, and we have our friend Jason Kramer. Jason, whenever you are ready. Sorry, I keep doing this. Okay, yep. Yes, I apologize. Before we dig in, we have two folks. I don't think Justin Hayes, Madam Comptroller, is supposed to be signed up for testimony. I didn't think so. Okay. All right. Denise Gilmore with AFSCME. My apologies, Denise.
No, it's totally fine. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Denise Gilmore. I'm a legislative director with AFSCME Council 3. I promise I will be brief. Mostly just want to respond to a few comments from the very thorough analysis and from the testimony earlier. For us, it all comes down to, and I know this isn't the first time we've said it, but a lot does come down to salaries. The comptroller is inheriting, all of our agency secretaries are inheriting a situation where unfortunately the employees in their agencies really experienced stagnant wage growth for about a decade. And so what that has led to in very recent years, we've done some work to lift incoming salaries. But it's really, I really want to lift up that wage compression issue that folks heard about earlier for the 13-year employee, who is contemplating whether or not to stay through that full 30 years to receive the retirement benefit. It can be really hard to stomach seeing new employees come in making now virtually the same amount of money as you are. We still think that rather than maybe legislating a, separate salary scale, we would appreciate the ability to negotiate one. Issues around pay are, subjects of negotiation. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to work on that. But it all comes down to making sure we have the funding and the pins to be able to, work within those negotiations. So we do hope to continue to engage in those discussions, both with the committee and with the comptroller. But we're very appreciative, I think, of all the continued attention on this huge vacancy issue that is happening everywhere. And we just want to reiterate that it is both a recruitment and a retention issue, and that more needs to be done on the retention end too. And then finally, we support the comptroller's, efforts to update the IT framework in the office. Our members have long complained about that. I think infrastructure can be also physical building infrastructure. We know that there are a lot of outdated work sites as well that could really use from a facelift. And so we hope that we, incorporate all of these ideas when we look at rebuilding state government. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Denise. Okay, I think that's all I had. I appreciate it. Now we can move on to Workers' Compensation Commission. Jason.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm excited. Before I get into workers' compensation, I'm excited about all the personnel talk. If you want to mark your calendars for next Tuesday in full committee, I'll be talking to you about it for a long time and hopefully answer all your questions and more. But today I'll be talking about the Workers' Compensation Commission. And as you can see here on the first page, the fiscal 2024 allowance increases by 5.5% to $22.6 million in fiscal 2024. On Exhibit 1 on page 2, this exhibit shows agency spending, and it shows that 61% of the allowance is for personnel, with spending on the commission's case management system making up 19% of the allowance. Exhibit 2 on page 3 shows the areas of change in the Workers' Compensation Commission's allowance. Most of the changes in personnel costs. Costs related to the Comp Hub major IT project grow by about $154,000 in the allowance. The project had previously been scheduled for completion in fiscal 2024, but funding is now extended into 2025 with a cost increase of about $3 million total. The project will be finished and usable in fiscal 2023, but developers and contractors will be needed for software enhancements and maintenance. And the commission has been unable to recruit replacements capable of the programming and development duties for the new system. Moving on to the first key observation issue on page 5. The commission's goal is to set 90% of hearings for injured workers within 60 days. The pandemic disrupted hearings and created a backlog of cases. Exhibit 3 here on page 5 shows that only 39% of hearings were set within 60 days of filing in fiscal 2021. But that's improved to 68% in fiscal 2022 as the agency worked through its backlog. The commission states it has cleared the backlog and expects to meet its goal in fiscal 2023. Exhibit 4 on page 6 shows the factors that go into calculating the commission's assessment on a state's insurers and self-insured entities to support operations, as well as the Department of Labor's Workplace Fraud Act and occupational safety and health programs. The assessment rate increased by 10% due to a decrease in the payroll base and increases in commission expenses. DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance, and that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. You did not touch on vacancy rate.
I did not, but they do. The commission does have a vacancy rate that's about 4 times higher than their budgeted turnover rate. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Questions for Jason? Okay, seeing none, we have Maureen Quinn, who's acting chair of the commission. Ms. Quinn. Good to see you.
Good to see you. For the record, I'm Maureen Quinn and Chair Elfreth and Vice Chair Rosapet, members of the committee. Good to see you. I want to say, Chair Elfreth, Mike Bush used to always say that 90 days a year, all of the members of the legislature were his constituents. And that certainly applies to my husband, Kumar Barve, and myself, because you helped us with our parking problems, not just this year, but last year as well. So we appreciate you. Thank you. I'm going to begin by introducing the star power that I brought with me today. To my right is Mary Ahern, our CEO. And next to her is Dave Jones, our CFO. And behind me, our COO, Teresa Cornish, and our Director of Fiscal Services, Jay Moore. So I am in the acting role, and I will continue to serve in that role until Governor Moore decides a permanent new chair. I do have a pending application. And if chosen, I'll be the first woman to chair the agency in 109 years. So the chair has to be chosen from amongst the 10 commissioners. But you should know that I have been a commissioner for the last 20 years. So I'm very familiar with the agency, both operationally and just as someone who's sat on the bench every day. I prepared for today's hearing by watching some of the hearings from last week. So I know that you want to have a very robust discussion around vacancies. And the next things I'm about to say are what I think are the necessary prelude to having a constructive discussion about vacancies. So when you think about our agency, it's most important that you think about us as a court. And though we are called commissioners, we actually are much like district court judges if you saw us in action. There are 10 of us, 9 of us take the bench every morning in our 7 courthouses that span from Cambridge on the east to LaVale in the west. Like the district courts, we handle a high volume of cases and we rely heavily on forms and have relaxed rules of evidence. We issue orders within 4 days of a hearing, and that's according to our annual report. So speed is the lifeblood of our work. Our appeal rate is 8%, a number that demonstrates, I believe, that we have not ever compromised quality for speed. So let me tell you how we're not like the district courts or any of our sister courts. During the pandemic, we only closed for 9 weeks. And during those 9 weeks, we mediated cases, we created a video hearing system that's still in place, and we redesigned the furniture in our courtrooms to keep everyone 6 feet apart. And at the end of that 9 weeks, we got back to work with face-to-face hearings. And we remained open, and because we did, we never had a chronic, sustained, systemic backlog. And we prevented just the entire ecosystem of law firms and vocational providers and healthcare and insurance companies. We helped them not collapse, economically collapse, because we stayed in business. So we have 115 full-time employees and we have 16 vacancies, and that's a 14% vacancy rate. 2 of the vacancies are court reporters. 5 are administrative people, 8 are IT personnel, and 1 CPA. So with respect to court reporters, we're down 2, but in addition, we have 4 that stayed on during the pandemic and delayed their retirement. And they are now actively considering their retirement in the next 12 months. Now, the retiring court reporters are not going to be replaced by the court reporters of old. And what we're all thinking about, the stenographers, that we see on TV and in the movies. I know this because we can't replace the 2 that we're currently missing. And it's not that it's a vanishing profession, but it's a profession that's transforming itself into a digital one. And the new name for these professionals and their degree programs is digital recorders, which is different from digital reporters. So I'm emphasizing this. So we're not going to lay off anyone, but we now have to purchase digital equipment to record our proceedings because of these pending retirements. So we'll still need pins for these digital recorders because the equipment doesn't run itself. And even presently, we have trained digital recorders applying for jobs at the commission that we don't have the equipment for. So this is going to be one of my priorities in the year ahead. So with respect to administrative positions, we have employed the following 5 strategies with some success. We have asked our employees, hey, do you know any friends or family that might qualify for these positions? And we've actually made 2 hires this way in the past year. And I'm happy to tell you that Teresa Cornish's son and Jay Moore's wife now work at the commission, not reporting to each other or anything like that, but we're so happy to have them. And we literally found them through this informal mechanism. And you think, well, 2 people, that's not a lot. But when you only have 14, it starts to be statistically significant. We've also put a happy employee on our interview panel who is there to address the pay differential because it inevitably does arise. And that person will emphasize the lower health insurance premiums and also the security of a lifetime pension. People are very afraid of running out of money before they die. And the security of a state pension, while it's very modest in its size, it's a huge selling point for state governments. And I think there's a lot of room to expand the success of this hiring tool. Maybe not for people right out of college, but once people have kids and you're hiring at the mid-tier level and people are like, I have kids, but I have to save for my retirement, it can make a difference. So anyway, the point of the happy employee on the interview panel is to highlight that this discrepancy between the private sector and the public sector is not as stark as the interviewee might think. Third, we have a modernized advertising program. While insurance is not a, I'm going to change the world profession, the helping of injured workers is meaningful work that we believe has appeal to an incredible millennial generation that prioritizes societal values. Fourth, we've offered more telework to employees for whom that makes a difference. And most importantly, fifth, we're trying to nurture the talent we have and talk to them about transition planning. People need to be explicitly told, hey, you're terrific and you're part of the next generation of agency leaders. If you don't do that, they're going to succumb to offers from the outside for more money. Lastly, with respect to IT personnel, and that's half of our vacancy rate, 8 out of the 16. We've done what every other agency has done, but a governmental task force is needed to solve this problem in my view. I mean, other than the tools I've already described, to me, it looks like a problem that can only be cured with money. And that's not just for the new hires, because you can't have your existing IT workers making less than the newbies. I mentioned one open CPA position. That is a brand new pin it's being reclassed. So I'm optimistic because I don't have any reason not to be. And that's the way I am. So that is, I guess, the drill down on our vacancies and why they exist and who they are. And all these people aren't data points to me. I've known all of them for 20 years. So that concludes my remarks, and I'll await the questions of the committee.
Thank you. We appreciate that, Madam Commissioner, and especially the IT portion. It's something where we hear every time we have a hearing here. So we'll take that back into consideration. Where would you like to be a year from now? Appreciating that there are, circumstances beyond your control, but where would you like to sit in terms of your vacancy rate?
I think between the retirements that I know are coming in the court reporting division, which I can't emphasize enough is going to affect us operationally. I can't run a courtroom without a court reporter. And I'm not going to have the RFP up and running with all of the construction of the digital equipment and the installation done a year out, plus other retirements. I think we're going to be in the same place we are today.
Okay.
They're going to be different, but I think it's going to be the same number.
I appreciate your honesty. Thank you. Okay, Senator Rosepep.
Thank you. I want to go back to the court reporters and the digital recorders. So you're at half, you have a 50% vacancy rate for court reporters? Did I understand that?
No, well, there are 14 and we're only missing 2
I'm sorry.
right now, but there are 4 more actively
Looking to retire.
That's
right. That's how I
Yeah.
messed up the math.
That's okay.
So how do you cover, how do you survive with 2 out of 14 vacant? How does it work? People do overtime, or do you delay things, or what do you do?
Right now, we're hanging on just fine and we don't have a backlog. But if too many people were to start asking for leave at the same time, their leave would have to be denied just because there wouldn't be coverage. So that's how the 2 affects us. 6 vacancies.
No, I understand.
I can't open all my courtrooms, and that's
Right.
a
so
very
you
bad,
just need
very
to-
dire.
You'll slow down. I
Yeah.
understand. Explain a little bit more about this technology. I'm trying to get in my head the old technology, the new technology.
Yeah,
And where
because
the people fit into it.
even before I came to the commission, I practiced in the circuit court, as in they had all that digital equipment. And so I never, worked in a stenographer style courtroom, except when I went to federal court. But this is, it's recorded, but people have to be tagged. So this microphone and that microphone, they all have to be tagged, and somebody's got to set it up, and somebody has to know, well, what lawyer is speaking and what witness
I
is
got you. No,
speaking.
that
So
makes
it's not a labor-free
But it's
operation.
definitely different set of skills.
Yes.
Gotcha.
In fact, it's very hard to pass the stenographer school. Their fail rate is very, very high. So I think being a digital recorder is easier.
Yeah,
So I think that people will,
Bigger pool.
we
No,
will have more people.
no, I understand.
Yeah.
And how expensive is the equipment?
I don't know the answer to that question. We're working on an RFP, and do we have a number yet? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, ballpark. I mean, is it $10,000, $100,000, $1 million? Any idea at all? Nope. Okay.
Okay. And it's not just the equipment itself. In fact, I'll tell you something else. We don't have full courtroom security. I don't have any pass-through, metal detectors. I don't have wands. I don't have anything. And so that and this are my two highest
I got you.
priorities. And it's not the equipment, it's all the construction and you've got to have the microphones placed
got you.
and speakers,
Okay,
everything's
that's
got to
all.
be in the right place. So it's a construction endeavor as well.
I got you. The other thing, the IT vacancies. What IT is a very big field. What are the jobs? I mean, to do what?
Well, we just spent $25 million on a brand new IT program. It's rolling out in April. So some of it is related to that program. Should I shoot this to our CEO, Mary?
Sure. The positions are going to involve programmers, developers, people that have cloud familiarity, because we're moving to the cloud with our new system. Some will be in architecture, security of our system. So necessary. We recently hired a network person, but we hired him from within. And so we gave him the necessary training and got him, and then he could apply for the promotional opportunity. But there are some positions that we have to go outside of the agency because we don't have the knowledge base within.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pretty much hit on the last piece about the IT and those positions, but my second part, you almost completed, was dealing with the security at these facilities.
Yeah.
Very
Well,
important piece.
yes, you may know this, but we are completely staffed by retired state troopers, most of whom came out of executive protection. So they are so top notch. I just can't say enough. I mean, of all the people that I'm really close to at the commission, those are my friends. And they are doing the best they can with their human intelligence. But we all agree that in the last, 3 or 4 years, the world has public places have become so vulnerable to violence that we just can't operate like this anymore.
Absolutely. So in knowing that the folks you had there, could you please ensure that we get information on the equipment that's necessary?
Actually, we do have a price on that, and it's very surprising. $30,000 for 6 courthouses, because one is a temporary courthouse, but yeah, but the staff.
Familiar with that, but yeah.
Yeah.
So if you could get us that information.
Yeah, we'd be happy to do
appreciate
that.
All
Okay,
right, thank you.
thank you.
Following up on that, will we see that in your capital budget hearing or request at all, that $30,000?
Dave, can you?
That would just be a part of our operating budget.
It'd be part of operating?
We actually think that we can absorb the equipment cost probably in this current fiscal year with money we will still have, because it's such a low amount.
Which is why I was going to say we could probably be helpful with that, but if you can absorb it, all the better. Okay, thank you. Senator Solling.
Thank you. Thank you for all the information. I go and follow up on the security because of one of our courthouses was shot out at Essex. It had
I
a
heard
very
about
serious
that.
issue. And I
Yes.
think you've heard about that.
Mhm.
And I've talked to the retired officers that are there. And every time I go there to meet someone or talk with some of them, they always refer back to a situation that happened there. And there was supposed to be a follow-up and it never happened. I was going to get with my county executive, but I wanted to know where you are with that.
Well, it's hard to believe, but we've really not had any serious scares.
Yeah.
But in some ways, it's a real testament to a lot of the psychological work that our troopers do. And they also have really close relationships with the lawyers. And they rely upon the lawyers to say, hey, my client's pretty angry today. He's a little out of control, a little unbalanced. You want to keep an eye on him. But which they do, and they usually will approach and try and have a productive conversation, make sure the person's calm. Of course, all the commissioners know, if you have somebody that seems very, very volatile and potentially dangerous, don't make it worse. You have to just whatever they're saying, you have to validate it. We don't announce our decisions from the bench. We never have. precisely because we have such an impact on whether people can feed their families at the end of, our decision-making process. So we try and keep the whole atmosphere calm.
And I know it's helpful. I just look at some of our areas, just when you go to grocery stores, they have poles there. So people can't take their cart. But
Right.
We don't have anything like that, or security for the windows, like bulletproof, that
Right.
protect those that are protecting the people there.
Yeah.
I think it's a priority in our areas that we need to do something like that. And we
Yeah.
protect the grocery store,
Yeah.
protect the food, protect the people. I think we need to protect our courthouses, and I think it's something we need to look into. Whether it's replacing the window with bulletproof, putting the poles there, make sure the
Yep.
vehicle doesn't ride up or anything like that,
Yeah.
which they had before. I
Yeah.
think it's maybe a conversation we should have, so I appreciate that.
I agree.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Senator. Last question on the IT upgrades. Will we see that in any budget, or are you projecting to bring that to us next year for a request?
The IT, it's already in our budget.
It's in your
already
budget.
in our budget.
In fact, last year we gave $600,000 back to the insurance companies, and it was mostly all of it was due to vacancies and unused, unspent salaries.
Okay, so you'll be upgrading IT over the course of this next fiscal year?
Mhm.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Okay, we look forward to hearing about that progress next year.
Okay, terrific. Thank you.
all very
All
much.
right.
Thank you.
Okay, double check. I don't have anybody signed up for this. To testify publicly. Okay. And then we can move on to the Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services. We have Madeline Miller with us. Ms. Miller, when you're ready.
All right, thank you and good afternoon. Today I'll be presenting the GOCP YVS analysis. In fiscal 2024, the budget decreases 6.4% to $371.5 million. Nearly 2/3 of the $25.5 million decline can be explained by the removal of 3 general fund deficiencies. The office has 3 main policy areas: criminal justice and law enforcement, children and youth, and victim services. Across these 3 areas, GOCP-YVS serves as an advisor to the governor, a coordinator between the state and local entities, and as a grants administrator. The performance analysis section begins on pages 3 and 4. One of the ways that GOCP-YVS acts as a coordinator is through the creation of the annually requested Youth Out of Home Placements Report. This report is created with information from the Department of Human Services, the Developmental Disabilities Administration, and Behavioral Health Administration, and MDH, and the Maryland State Department of Education. Between fiscal 21 and 22, the number of youth who experienced at least one out-of-home placement fell 2.6% to 6,381. Exhibit 1 on page 5 details the rate of out-of-home placements per 1,000 youth in each jurisdiction. 60.1% of all placements kept youth in their home county. 36.9% were placed somewhere else within Maryland, and only 3% were placed out of state, lower than was achieved earlier in the pandemic. Looking more closely at youth hospitalizations, there were 676 youth hospitalizations under DHS in fiscal 2022. This represents a 9% increase compared with fiscal 21. The report states that there was a significant decrease in youth experiencing a hospital overstay, and DLS is asking that GOCP-YVS comment on how it measures hospital overstays for youth and share how it may have changed in fiscal 22 compared with previous years. DLS further recommends that the budget committees release the funds for the fiscal 22 report, and also DLS recommends the adoption of language for the report to be submitted again for fiscal 2023. In its coordinating and grants administering roles, GOCP-YVS also operates the Maryland Criminal Intelligence Network. MSIN was established in 2017 to identify, disrupt, and dismantle violent criminal networks through cross-jurisdictional coordination and data sharing. The number of violent criminal networks disrupted or dismantled by MSIN sites funded by GOCP-YVS is shown in Exhibit 2. In fiscal 22, 631 networks were disrupted or dismantled, an all-time high and a 79.8% increase compared with fiscal 21. I'll now begin my discussion of the agency's budget. The working appropriation includes $4.9 million in CARES funding and over $530,000 in ARPA funds. The agency also receives $8 million across 4 grants from the dedicated purpose account and 3 proposed general fund deficiency appropriations to replace funds mistakenly reverted during the fiscal 22 closeout process, as $3.2 million for LELE grant funding, $3.3 million for BCCPI grant funding, and $4,116,000 for VSU grant funding. The deficiencies will be discussed further in the issue section of the analysis. Exhibit 3 on page 9 provides an overview of agency spending, most of which goes to the agency's grant programs. The administrative headquarters accounts for 34% of the total allowance. Approximately 51% of the GOCVIBS allowance is appropriated for various local law enforcement grants, including the annual allocation of the formula-based SAP fund. The remaining 15% includes the Children's Services Unit, the VSU, MSIN, BCCPI, VIP, and the Maryland Statistical Analysis Center. Exhibit 4 on pages 11 and 12 provides explanations for how the budget changes from fiscal 23 to 24. Decreases are driven primarily by the removal of fiscal 23 deficiencies, the removal of fiscal 23 grants funded by the dedicated purpose account, and the removal of pandemic-related federal stimulus funds, which were previously mentioned. The decreases are partially offset by the addition of 2 new positions for the Maryland Behavioral Health and Public Safety Center of Excellence. The center was established by Chapter 68 and 69 of 2021 and Chapter 350 of 2022. More information about that center can be found in the discussion after this exhibit. As Exhibit 4 demonstrates, budget changes are driven by grant programming. Additional detail about the changes to state grants and federal grants can be found in Appendix 4 and 5 respectively. One way in which grant funding remains consistent, though, is through the continuation of fiscal 23 enhanced public safety funding efforts. Exhibit 5 details elements of that enhanced public safety funding initiative, which are relevant to GOCPYVS. Note particularly the $45.9 million enhancement for SAP is continued. SAP funds provide support to local and county police agency operations. And the formula decreases in fiscal 24 by $462,093, but the enhancement portion is appropriated to the different counties, is portioned exactly as it was in fiscal 23, as shown in Exhibit 6 on page 4. To continue allocating funding to target jurisdictions facing high instances of violent crime, DLS recommends adding budget language allocating the fiscal 24 SAP enhancement funds based on violent crime data found in Maryland's 2021 UCR. Currently, the enhancement is portioned using calendar 2020 data. And scroll to top personnel here. The where it goes chart does not reflect a change in funding for the warrant apprehension funding provided in supplemental budget 3 of 2022. The supplemental budget was for fiscal 22 and 23. The allowance suggests funding will instead be provided in fiscal 23 and 24. GOCPYVS should comment on the use of funds in each fiscal year and the progress that has been made on the initiative. Personnel data is shown on page 16. This is an agency with high turnover, even though there are only about 100 positions in the department. As of December 31st, there were 11 vacant positions and its vacancy rate is 10.62 percentage points above the budgeted turnover. 8 of the vacant positions have been vacant for less than a year. The issues portion of the analysis begins on page 17 with a discussion of the agency's grant oversight. 96.7% of the agency's budget is for grants in the fiscal 24 allowance. GOCVIBS oversees $359.2 million for this purpose. In the fiscal 22 and 23 MFR submissions, GOCVYVS did not report some grants management measures as it had previously. The 2022 JCR restricted $125,000 for GOCPYVS to return to reporting that data. Except for the percentage of unused state funds returned in fiscal 2022, GOCPYVS reported the information as requested, and DLS therefore recommends the release of funds. Exhibit 7 on page 18 shows the percentage of grants in compliance, the percentage of grants with above average compliance, and the number of grants audited completed between fiscal 2018 and 2022. Between those years, the number of audits dropped from 34 to 12. And during fiscal 2020, the number fell significantly further to just 6 audits completed, which GOCPYVS attributes to the COVID-19 pandemic. This, however, does not explain the decline prior to the pandemic. Position vacancies and turnover may be related. GOCPYVS will receive $16.8 million in 3 fiscal 23 deficiencies for general funds accidentally reverted during the fiscal 22 closeout. Some of these funds are accidentally reverted due to their status as non-lapsing special funds. That occurs when the state budget records funds as being added via general funds, and then they will be located in a special fund and stay in the special fund for the agency to spend in future years. GOCPYVS cannot explain why $2.9 million in special funds and $16.7 million in federal funds were canceled as well. But the agency reports it has created a strategy for dealing with the non-lapsing special funds type for fiscal 23 closeout. This is not the first time that there have been significant grant funds reverted. In response to GOCPYVS reverting $17.2 million in general funds in fiscal 2020, language in the 2021 JCR restricted funds within the agency's budget to be used for contracting with a private accounting firm to perform a fiscal audit. Language also required that GOCPYVS submit a report with the audit's findings and any corrective actions that the office had taken by December 31st, 2021. That report's deadline has been extended 3 times. And though the office put out a task order request for proposal in May with a June 16th due date, a vendor was not selected until the end of October. The agency now reports it is contracted with the vendor to perform the audit, and the audit is underway. The audit costs approximately $49,000 and is expected to be completed by the end of the current fiscal year. To ensure that the budget committees receive the results of the audit requested by the fiscal 22 budget language, DLS is recommending restricting funds pending the submission of a report by July 1, 2023. The second issue in the analysis relates to VOCA. VOCA is a program which seeks to provide victims of crime with assistance and services to support their restoration following a violent crime and to help them navigate the criminal justice process. Exhibit 8 shows the federal awards received each year. Note that this chart is for federal fiscal years, which begin later in the calendar year than Maryland's fiscal years. In federal fiscal 2018, the availability of funding increased 79.9% from $34 million to $61.1 million as the federal government attempted to spend down a sizable accumulated fund balance. Since then, the federal awards have decreased. This amount was approximately $26.3 million in federal fiscal 2022. At the federal level, Congress has passed the VOCA Fix Act to increase federal awards above their current level, but it will take some years to do so. Exhibit 9 shows VOCA expenditures in recent state fiscal years, including 5 years of continuation funding between fiscal 2019 and 2023. Continuation funding is a policy set by the MGA, which requires VOCA funding be awarded to individual service providers at a level equal to that of their previous year. The fiscal 23 budget represents the 5th year of continuation funding that non-state victim service providers have been eligible for. The 2022 JCR also required the office to submit 2 reports on VOCA grant award data and a letter to the budget committees. $1.5 million was withheld for those purposes. GOCPYVS substantially provided the information requested, and DLS therefore recommends the release of those withheld funds. Prior to continuation funding efforts, spreading out the use of the federal award across multiple years allowed GOCPYVS to carry a balance for VOCA. This balance could be used to smooth the effects of a decreased federal award and allow the agency to fulfill awards at a higher level of actual spending than it had in the previous year. Actual spending increased from $8 million in fiscal 2015 to $43.7 million in fiscal 2021. Actual spending rose further in fiscal 22 as shown in Exhibit 11. However, the VOCA balance and the federal award were not enough to achieve continuation funding, and the federal award had to be supplemented with $19.8 million in ARPA funds. $35 million in general funds were also added to the fiscal 23 budget through supplemental budget number 3 of 2022. This general fund support is continued into fiscal 24. As the exhibit shows, GOCPYVS had to use the fund balance to meet the actual level of spending in fiscal 22. In fiscal 23, it's estimated that the agency will have enough general and federal funds to meet the 5th year of continuation funding, and the agency reports it will have an estimated $14.8 million in federal funding left over for use in fiscal 2024. In the agency's testimony, they propose a spending plan for fiscal 24 and for subsequent years that DLS asks that they comment on. Finally, I'd like to say that in recent years, the use of continuation funding has meant that the pool of potential VOCA recipients in Maryland has decreased to only those who were eligible for funding in the previous year. And as the state's VOCA program has expended its annual funding over time, it is increasingly important that the budget committees understand how VOCA spending benefits Marylanders. This is why the DLS bold language at the bottom of page 25 asks that GOCPYVS report on the 2 reports and letter that it previously receives, as well as also including program outcomes in its next year of submitting information to the legislature. The DLS recommended actions appear on page 26 through 31, and that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you, Madeline. Questions for the analyst? Senator Jackson.
Yes, thank you. Obviously, this wasn't the first time that we did not get a report. So from 2018 to 2022, were there mechanisms put in place to try to retrieve those?
That would be a good question for the agency. The general funds can be returned to the agency via deficiencies, like is done in this current budget. And when special and federal funds are canceled, they can be brought back into the budget via budget amendment. But I think the agency would be able to address specifics.
I understand. Let me ask you this question, and I will ask the agency, but we have all new people. So. I guess we can talk offline about ways for us to get to the root of problems when administrations change, either abruptly or due to a term expiration. So, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I'm equally grave, might be too strong of a word, but gravely concerned about continuation of this behavior. Madeline, just to be clear, even though some of the funds reverted were federal funds, we didn't lose those federal funds.
We didn't lose the opportunity to have them because the agency has not been able to report in the most recent year, which specific federal fund sources those are. I can't offer a better response.
Okay. My last question for you, Madeline, thank you, is how we're breaking down based on last year's budget language and your recommendation here on for the SAP funding for jurisdictions facing high instances of violent crime. Do we have that breakdown from last year's just so the subcommittee can make the most informed decision?
So the amount that was when the SAP budget was introduced last year, the governor's allowance had come in with a proposed allocation of funds. The legislature decided to, rather than use the proposed formula for the enhancement, had decided to apply priority of the funds to jurisdictions based upon their level of violent crime rates. Currently, the way that the fiscal 24 allowance allocates those funds is identical to how it was done in fiscal 23 due to the reliance on the 2020 data, which was published in the Uniform Crime Report. As the 2021 data is not yet been published, the data is consistent between those two fiscal years, and the exhibit would provide that breakdown. The municipality level information is not yet available or is not available at the time of the publishing of the budget books. However, due to the timing that the agency would need to get information back from local jurisdictions, and the agency includes in their testimony a proposed plan for changing some of the specifics about the SAP formula in general, which would allow there to be greater transparency for how SAP formula and SAP enhancement funds moving forward would be applied.
Okay. And for my edification, who's responsible for the UCR?
So that's a combination of the Department of State Police as well as local law enforcement data contributors. There have been delays in the publication due to the federal switch to a new reporting system known as NIBRS. So the state police NIBRS, the state police program for submitting data to the FBI is compliant with the NIBRS program. However, not all of the local agencies have been able to submit complete years of data to state police, and that process has meant that it's not expected to be published until mid-March.
Thank you very much. Senator Jackson.
Yes, just a quick follow-up. Great explanation, by the way. Over 150, nearly 160 law enforcement agencies. Counties are relied upon, agencies like Prince George's with 20 plus police agencies. You know, getting agencies up to speed and getting that information in has always been troublesome. And it's really showing now because of the systems that are in place. To answer or to comment on your first question or one of your questions, regarding the SAP formula, the SAP formula had originally been prepared for violent crime and property crimes. And last year, the General Assembly changed it to violent crime. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Okay. With us, we have Ms. Veronica Mullis, who's the Acting Executive Director and Chief Financial Officer in the office. Whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Elfreth, Vice Chair Rosapep, and committee members. Thank you for allowing us to be here. And thank you, Madeline, for your detailed budget analysis. My name is Veronica Mullis. I am the current CFO of the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention and Youth and Victim Services. I'm also the interim acting executive director. The agency concurred with all the recommended actions in Ms. Miller's budget analysis, and we have nothing to add. So I am open to any questions you may have.
So we've been at this, I think we're just past the halfway mark of our budget hearings. I can't remember another budget where we've had to have so many corrective actions in a budget before. And I think that speaks to some of the challenges your agency has faced. Again, I'm gravely concerned with this latest reversion, particularly because it was funding that was meant to go to our local law enforcement agencies, which we all represent and could desperately use that funding. So can you please speak to us a little bit about how that occurred? Are we in fact losing federal funding since it reverted? And how we're going to ensure that this never happens again?
So, let me start by saying that the agency was created in 2020, and that transition was very difficult. There's a lot of disciplines that should have been in place that weren't in place. And, because of that, we had high turnover, people were trying, but, the budget also expanded exponentially between 20 and 22. And the staffing did not. The amount of federal grants and awards and just grants in general that the agency handles you know, we didn't get more people for that. We still had the same number of people. And so turnover and the combination of, you know, the expansion, I think, put us in a position where it got ahead of the agency. I think we're now in a position where, you know, I don't think people understood the concept of that funding source. It's since been addressed. There's, you know, guidance in our manual now that tells us what we need to do, when we need to do it, and what fund source it impacts. With regard to whether or not it impacted or we lost any funding as a result of that, the answer is no. We got the deficiency back in, and the way those special funds work is they do get converted into the special fund. But on, you know, with that being said, a lot of planning has to go into that and how those funds get spent. And you can't plan for the funds if they're not sitting in the revenues so that you can spend them. So moving forward, we'll know how much money is sitting in the reserves, and we can better budget for that and expand, you know, funding for SAP, or not SAP, but police services that we provide money for. With regard to the federal grants, we, you know, again, we lost only that fiscal year appropriation. We did not lose the federal funds. And as Madeline Miller pointed out, we can go back and ask for that funding to be reinstated in our budget to spend it.
I think I'm confused on this point. So, and recognizing there's a couple budget maneuvers happening, federal funds coming in, mixing in, I'm not sure if they mix in because we don't have the audit, with state funding that was not spent, reverted back to the general fund when it was unspent. Now you have a deficiency appropriation, but that deficiency appropriation theoretically is coming from general funds, not from federal funds.
Yeah, what that is, that deficiency appropriation, if you go back and read the laws that govern that, we get to convert half of that state police, the PIGIF money, into our special fund reserves. So it sits there in reserves, but you cannot spend special funds unless you have the revenue sitting there to cover it.
Okay, we might have to sit down and do some math. Well, I'm going to collect myself. Senator Jackson.
So thank you first. Secondly, look, the challenge here is this. We have a responsibility. And I was on the House side when the Office of Children, Governor's Office of Children, was combined with GOCAP, and you guys came up with this, I can't ever pronounce it, but at the end of the day, it was combined because of a lack of structure and accountability in the office, Governor's Office of Children. And yet, shortly thereafter, we end up with the same challenge. And the most important challenge is that we have children and we have victims and we have communities that need protection. And we're not providing that when we fall off, such as this. And even worse than that, from a budget committee standpoint, we can't even account for where the challenges are. So going forward, look, we want to be your partner because we are all a part of this. At the end of the day, we are accountable when we go home to our communities. So we want to be your partner. So we're asking if we could walk lock and stock with you all, as long as this governor has decided or continues that this is the path that he wants to take, whether he wants to break it off, to try to open, to separate the two, decouple the two, or if he wants to continue on this path. Some of us, again, we're all accountable here. We'll be going forward. And some of us have worked in this arena for a long time, and we understand gravely what these missteps are costing. So, we're your partners here, but we have a responsibility to get to the bottom of it. So
Sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
No, thank you. Thank you for the information. I'm just looking at, I have to say this, at least one thing is I'm looking at is doing well is out of state placements and how we're doing better there. And that was a priority to me prior to families. making sure that at least they can get as close by as possible to get the help that they need as necessary. I mean, how are we doing it now? How are we doing this, having it?
I will have to get back with you on that. That's, you know, the youth and children's group. So I will have to
Yes.
get back with you to answer that.
Because it states, you know, even hospitalizations, you know, the numbers of the youth, 667 under DHS and 9% increase, but still, we're looking at the numbers that it seems like we're doing a better job. So we just want to know how we're doing that. And, you know, we see the other places that they do in other states, but at least we're doing something good there. But I think we need in other areas of better communication, I mean, and help these situations out. So thank you.
Sure. You know, the agency itself, you know, as pointed out in the analysis, is, you know, very heavily grant run. Right. So you know, you need people to manage all those grants. You need people to do the fiscal side of that. And, you know, you've also got the victim services, and you also have the children and youth, and then you'll have the law enforcement. But when you're so heavily grant funded, you know, that takes a lot of resources to manage those things, which I think, you know, we need to keep separate from the other three groups to make sure that they're properly staffed and have the resources they need to operate. You know, I think moving forward, I feel like the agency is in a very good position. I feel like there's been a lot of things put in place to make it run better. There's suggestions that we have, like for VOCA, that's going to help make it more transparent to the committee and everyone as to the funding that we have. And, you know, we, you know, are hoping that we can move forward in a positive way.
I think we all want to move forward in a positive way. I think where we struggle, and granted, we are in this room, the four of us, and our very talented staff, 3 days a week. So we see themes come up. One of those themes is very clearly under the last administration, departments and agencies did not have the resources and the manpower they needed to fulfill their mission. And when that happens, things either break, as we've seen many times across state government, or we see some not perfect auditing and some perhaps reversions that are inappropriate, some grants that are less than stellar. So it's a grave concern.
Sure.
I would like to dig down into the federal piece of this funding because I want to ensure that we did not lose that forever and we're making up for it in general funds. That's a piece that I'd like us to all figure out moving forward. And I would love for your agency to think about, if you don't have the manpower to fulfill your mission appropriately, I appreciate you might not have been allowed to ask for those resources prior. As Senator Jackson alluded, and everybody on the subcommittee, we are your partners here. So we need to ensure that you have those resources needed, because this is an unacceptable pattern that we will just not be able to stomach again next year. So please let us know what you need to fulfill your mission. I'm hard pressed. Every budget and agency that comes before us is important. Yours is one that touches all of our communities and most of our constituents in one way or another. And so it's very important that we get this right.
Sure. I mean, if you look at the analysis, you know, we out of, you know, the 90 some pins that we have, we got 10 new Protect pins last year. We got, you know, 2 new MSIN pins. But we got a whole lot more grants than we did people. And, you know, that takes its toll, as everybody knows. And in addition to that, you know, we've got 31 out of the 100 that are contractual. You can't recruit. Pay is an issue, you know, and if on top of pay, you know, there's no benefit to those people. You know, they don't get a retirement. They don't, you know, they can now get health care, but there's a lot that they don't get. And, you know, you try to recruit new people, and it's the same thing for, you've heard all day here, is that, you know, in order to bring those people in, you got to pay them more than the people that you have doing the same job. And that does not sit well, as, you know, with the people that are there working hard.
So talk to us about your vacancy rate, where you'd like to be this time next year, the unique challenges, if you want to break that down by where you're seeing the highest vacancy rates, and then your plan to fix it and how we can be helpful with that.
Sure. Can I present that to you and get back to you? Because it's a it's multi-purpose because we're talking about the different groups that we have in-house and having to have moved resources to try to keep the grants going and maybe taken away from other groups that could have had more people. So we need to look at that and evaluate that and get back with you on
Okay,
that.
we'd appreciate that as soon as you can get it to us. We're going to see themes across state government, but it's important that we understand the nuances of the challenges you face so we can help you fix them.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, we've tried to hire, procurement people. We've been out 4 times. They're not there. They're just not there.
Okay.
So.
Let's shift to the audit and the 3 delays that we've experienced. And again, we are stewards of the public's money and the public's trust. So a delay in audit 3 times is a lot. Will we be getting it before the end of the fiscal year?
Yes.
Okay.
we will. We're in process now. I unfortunately cannot speak to what did or did not happen before I came.
Mm-hmm.
I just know that when we came, when I was there, DBM worked with us and I have them to thank. They loaned us somebody that can help us get through the procurement process because we don't have a procurement person. So they worked with us on getting the RFP. We put it out there. There were some issues with how those vendors responded to us that had to be resolved, put things back a little bit, but they are in place now and they are working and we do plan to have it done by the end of this fiscal year.
Okay. And that's an overarching audit, but obviously we want to get your compliance audit of grants annually back up to where
You will get that.
okay. So you're currently hovering at about 12% of grants audited every year. Where would you like to, you previously sat around 68%.
Yeah, it's an issue that we need to deal with. That will be one of the personnel things that come on because we don't have any auditors. So we've been doing desk audits via our grants people that get the performance reports and go out there and work with the entities to do the audits for them as a desk audit. But we do need that staff to come back.
So you currently don't have any auditors on staff. What are you allocated to have in terms of auditors on staff?
I think we had 2 full-time and then part-times. And they left.
Okay. That's a grave concern that we need to get
And we
auditors back.
recently did try to go back out and hire auditors and they turned us down too.
Okay. It
So
feels like we're
it's not for
triaging
lack
here.
of trying. We have been trying. We just can't fill them.
Okay. Other questions? Yep, Senator Song.
Do me a good senator across the way here for qualifications. What are the qualifications for this type of position for audits?
I do believe that it's, they have to have a degree in auditing. But we're not doing much more than that. Then, again, some of these positions are lead auditors, so they have to have some experience. And, if we find somebody, it's usually we don't have the funding to pay them.
Okay, let's move on to VOCA. Appreciating federal budget timeline doesn't nicely coincide with our budget timeline, doesn't nicely coincide with the needs of our grantees. So can you verbalize the fix that you've requested making in your testimony, please?
So I tried to explain this earlier last week and I didn't do so well, so bear with me. So what's happening now is when we develop the budget, which starts in September, that goes into the governor's allowance, we do not know what the federal funding is going to be in the next fiscal year. It's a guess because we don't get our award until September of the fiscal year that we're in. So what we've proposed is that there is, and I don't like to use the word reserve, but there's available federal funding in grants. I do believe I put 20 and 21 to the tune of $14 million plus the $35 million in general funds that we could sustain the same level as we had in 23 and use that funding for 24. Now this is using federal award 21. Do I say 21 or 22? I gotta go back and look. But nonetheless, what it does is it preserves the federal award for 23 that we don't know until September. That then becomes our starting point for developing the next budget cycle in 25. And we then know how much federal funding we will get for VOCA, instead of trying to guess how much money we will get in federal funding. Does that make, and then, that also helps us make a more transparent decision on how much general funds we need, because we'll know how much federal funds we have sitting there.
In theory, the math makes sense, and I think it would provide a greater degree of transparency to our grantees. But I want to ask before Senator Jackson, we have obviously the VOCA made whole bill this year that moved through the Senate, hopefully moves through the House as well. How would that bill affect this plan that you've laid before us?
That would pose a little bit of a problem for us, because we then, if we were to meet the need of the 60 million, we would need a one-time infusion of funding to help us gap between what we know we have and the 49, between the 35 and the 14, to get to that 60. So that would be a one-time fix that would need to be implemented to help us get to the 60 and not, turn back the clock on what we're trying to do moving forward.
Okay, Senator Jackson.
So I am familiar with this concept. So your agency haven't run an agency where you had numerous federal grants, and your fiscal year for the state and counties are different than the feds. You have to build it into your budget.
Correct.
To make sure that you have that carryover. And my challenge here is trying to get my head wrapped around one, how we got to where we are with an agency. GOCAP's been up and running for a while. The Office of Governor's Office of Children has been up and running for a while. And how do we get to a point where we cannot, put that budget process in place to ensure that we're providing the services. So I got, Madam Chair, I'm having a challenge here to I think we have a lot of work to do. And I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get anything done today on this end. But, I am very familiar with that process. And the mere fact that we would have to infuse some dollars to carry over for 3 months is very concerning to me, that we don't have that we have to find a way to do that. So I guess maybe we'll do a lot of offline work to try to figure out where we are.
Well, I will be happy to to work with you and lay that process out. It's the goal here is to preserve that FY23 federal grant award. And the only way to preserve that, should that 60 million be authorized, is to do that one-time infusion for 24 only.
That's not what I'm saying. Maybe it came out that way, but that's not what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Again, I'm talking about the gap, the gap that we're dealing with here, and the fact that we don't seem to have the fundings and not being able to locate those. So, but no, I understand if those dollars come in to catch that one-time infusion. I guess what I'm trying to say is there was again, and I'll stop this in a second, but there was a reason these two agencies were put together. There was a reason, because the belief was that GOCAP was organized enough to be able to take on an agency that needed some organizational structure. And the mere fact that we can't even look at the growth since then, because there are no audits available, is very challenging for us. And we have to be responsible with every dollar we have.
Sure.
So, all right, thank you.
To channel our chair, I think we're going to need to work group a lot of this. Okay. Okay, we've covered VOCA. We've covered your audit that we should be receiving. We've covered internal audits, annual audits that are going to need to get back up to where they used to be. Vacancy rate, if you can get us that detail and the challenges and your plan to fix it, we'd appreciate that. Appreciating this is a different administration, but every agency that comes before us is responsible for fulfilling their mission. So we that's the standard we're going to hold everybody to. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask, we have a lot of folks signed up to testify. I greatly appreciate the public input that we're going to get today. If you could stay and listen to all the grantees testify, I'd appreciate that. And if folks are testifying on VOCA, if you could comment on the proposed fix that the agency has requested, I know the subcommittee would appreciate that as well. Okay. So with that, we have Mr. Drew Vetter with Turnaround Inc., Miss Lisa Jordan with the Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and Amanda Rodriguez with Turnaround Inc. Let's do the three of you. Is that okay? Do the three of you together? Great. In whichever order you would like.
I think I'm first, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you. Excuse me, my name is Drew Vetter. I'm here on behalf of Turnaround, a nonprofit provider of support services for victims and survivors of intimate partner violence, sexual violence, and human trafficking. We're here to request an additional $1.1 million in the FY24 budget for startup costs associated with expanded residential resources for child survivors of sexual exploitation and trafficking in Maryland. We are further seeking an additional $1 million in FY25 and $1 million in FY26 for this project, for a total of $3.2 million over 3 years. The requested funding builds upon $5 million in state and local funds received in partnership with the YWCA of Annapolis and Anne Arundel County to construct the state's only dedicated facility to provide safe housing for child victims of human trafficking. We broke ground on this facility in November, and the additional requested funding will support staff, equipment, and operations to open the facility and to begin serving survivors when the facility opens, which is expected later this year. Once operational, we will be able to become licensed by the state, enabling us to seek funding from the state for the cost per client, which will serve as the revenue source going forward. That's it. We wanted to get that request on the record. We're working through the administration to request money in the supplemental budget for this as well. But we really wanted to highlight the importance of making good on this investment of this facility that we are currently building right now. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee, my name is Amanda Rodriguez. I am the Executive Director of Turnaround, which I'll mention in a moment, but I am here actually on behalf of the Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence. I am a board member for that organization. Turnaround is a comprehensive domestic violence agency. It's designated rape crisis center, and we serve Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and Howard counties. MNADV represents the 19 comprehensive domestic violence programs in Maryland, in addition to allied organizations and individuals. These programs provide emergency shelter, 24/7 hotlines, counseling, advocacy, and legal services to victims and survivors of domestic violence. The programs rely heavily on federal grant dollars that are administered through GOCPYVS. It's always going to be GOCAP to me, to provide life-saving services to victims and survivors of domestic violence. The need for an increase in funding for domestic violence programs is greater than ever. There were 58 lives lost to domestic violence in 2021. This is the highest number of domestic violence homicides since 2007. Programs are experiencing an unprecedented number of victims seeking help and have wait lists for services currently. The programs serving some of the most vulnerable citizens need sufficient funding, and level funding is not sufficient funding. In one day in Maryland in 2021, there were 762 victims served by comprehensive domestic violence programs and 302 hotline contacts. Unfortunately, there were 191 victims on that day who had unmet requests for services due to lack of resources. Almost 1/3 of the unmet needs were for housing and emergency shelter. At Turnaround last year, we received 13,000 calls. Some of our services, including legal and emergency shelter, increased by over 300% during the onset of the pandemic, or since the onset of the pandemic in 2020. However, our staffing has not caught up with the increased need, which has steadied but is not decreasing.
increasing the amount of federal general funds allocated for a grant known as DOMV to $5 million and reinstating and increasing the domestic violence center grant, which was not in the current budget that was proposed, to $5 million. We'll keep programs funded so that no victim has an unmet need, especially one that could be a matter of life and death. Thank you for your consideration.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Lisa Jordan with the Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault. I know many of you from other committees, and it's a pleasure to be here and have a woman in charge of the budget for rape crisis centers. The Maryland Coalition, as you know, represents all of the rape crisis centers, but please know that we also work very closely with the domestic violence programs and with the child advocacy centers. You have our written testimony. You also have written testimony from programs across the state. And I encourage you to look at it. But I just want to briefly draw the subcommittee's attention to three things: the increased demand and complexity on our programs, the workforce challenges, which feels redundant after all of the other subcommittee hearings that you've had today, but know that our programs are facing the same. And then I want to talk about the administrative challenges, including the VOCA issue. And I'll try to be as brief as possible, but one quote really stood out to me. Comparing a period of services in the current year to the same period last year, one of our rural programs told us the number of clients has increased by 30%, but the number of services has increased by 130%. And that's because people are asking for more help with more things. People who just used to get a protective order now need a protective order, and they need housing, and they need help getting food stamps, and they need help with their kids, and things are so much more complicated. Globally and locally, the pandemic really just created this perfect storm, isolating victims from access to services, giving abusers the ultimate power and control. But let me talk about some of those workforce challenges also, because as Senator Jackson well knows, we are small businesses. We create jobs, we pay rent, we make payroll. We can't do it unless we get funds. I can't make payroll if I don't get the money from GOCAP on time. And we can't provide the services your constituents need if we don't do something about our salaries. So some of the things we've heard, with some of the wages that we're able to offer our new employees, they can go to any fast food restaurant in our county and make the same, if not more. We recently had 2 crisis advocate positions open for nearly 8 months because our advocate salary is not competitive, and it's less than some local retail and hospitality positions. We are not able to compensate counselors at a rate that allows for them to pay for their schooling and licensure, yet we require schooling and licensure for their positions. I could go on, and you have that in the written testimony. And you've heard about the administrative challenges, and I do sympathize, and I do believe that the current staff at GOCAP is trying to repair a very badly broken agency, but it is so broken that as the lobbyist for the rape crisis centers, part of what I'm doing is searching through the state government to think, is there someplace we could flee to? Because this is so badly broken, and people have so little support within the agency because they're so understaffed that things are happening. Like, for years, we fought to make sure that we could get reimbursement on time. So you would get a grant and you would have to spend the money. So the agencies, your local rape crisis center is working as a bank for the state of Maryland. They're saying, okay, spend that money first. Once you've expended it, then you can ask for it and get it back. And for a while, if your grant was bigger than $50,000, automatically you could request, only on your request, you could say, I need monthly reimbursement. And now we've had some programs said, hey, we don't have enough staff at GOCAP, so you're going to have to go back to quarterly. So that means you've got programs who are having to front hundreds and thousands of dollars. They can't do it. They don't have that kind of cash flow. And if they have to tap into a line of credit, they're expending interest charges that we can't get reimbursed for. And you know what? The donors don't think that they should be paying for our interest charges because the government can't get us money back. It's really a badly broken system, and there is no executive director in place. And I am so hopeful. I think the new governor really understands nonprofits. I think that this is hopeful, but at the moment, there is no executive director in place, and we have fiscal staff who, and Ms. Mullis, she's very competent. I really appreciate her. I think she's doing a good job. She's not a victim services expert. She's not a child expert. She's not expert in placements for kids. We don't have that sort of expertise there. It's really a mess. I mean, it's a hot mess. And VOCA, you know, I appreciate theoretically the proposal to shift things around. And I do know that other states take that approach of kind of waiting for the federal allocation to come in, and there's not, you know, kind of a uniform meshing of the 2 fiscal years. So I think it makes sense. But in terms of looking at the actual numbers, I do think that we need to look at whether this would then require additional state funds to keep an increase and also make this, I think, fairly responsible fiscal change. It's not a bad idea, but it is dependent on whether or not the administration and the General Assembly has a commitment to fill that in and really bring us up to the 60.
Thank you all very much. And if we do a work group, plan to invite GOCAP, DBM, Governor's Office, and advocates as well to figure out the formula we're going to have to come up with here.
We'd appreciate that.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions for the panel? Thank you. Okay, next we have Mr. Don Schlimm from the Baltimore County Local Management Board, Wendy Myers from the Maryland Children's Alliance, and Amy Wilkinson from Hartley House. Ms. Brett, would you like to come up as the local management boards together?
Yes.
Okay, I apologize. That makes more sense than the way I have it written down here. So let's bring Dr. Brown and then Ms. Eisenreich.
Yes.
Okay. Did I get that right? Okay. We'll do local management boards first. Okay.
Great.
Any order you'd like, in 3 minutes apiece, please.
Right.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Elfreth and Senators. Very glad to be here to speak on behalf of local management boards. Pam Brown with the Anne Arundel County Local Management Board. Local management boards are part of a beautiful system that was created 30 years ago, unique to Maryland, with the notion that you needed a holistic system to serve children and families. That system in Maryland is a 3-legged stool. It is a children's cabinet that's made up of all of the different secretaries of all the different human services departments. Under that, the Governor's Office for Children, intended to be the technical and research arm of that children's cabinet. And then under that, 24 local management boards working on governor and legislative priorities, guided by the Governor's Office for Children and working locally, assessing needs, filling gaps, looking for funding, gathering partners. That worked beautifully, and we should all be very proud that that happened. In 2018, the Governor's Office for Children was moved under GOCAP, and it had already been weakened by being part of the governor's coordinating offices under the old administration. We are asking legislators, the governor, and anyone else we can to have the Governor's Office for Children brought back out of GOCAP so that it can fulfill its real destiny, which is to serve vulnerable children and families. Local management boards are also here asking for a funding increase. In 2009, we were funded at $54 million over 24 jurisdictions, using those dollars wisely to serve the most vulnerable children and families in each jurisdiction. By 2011, we were down, and so it continued down to 20 million by the time we got to 2020. We have been funded flat again this year. We are asking for 10 million this year. That would only bring us up to 30 million, which is half of what we had back in 2009. The last 3 years, as said so eloquently, have been extraordinary for all of us serving children and families. The most vulnerable are the ones who are most impacted by the pandemic and the ones who most need our help and services this year. Anything from mental health, through housing, through food. That need continues. I know we all want to believe the pandemic has gone away for some, but not for the families that we serve. So I will end there. I want my colleagues to talk about the splendid work that they are doing at their local level. Kim?
Thanks, Pam. Thank you, Chair Elfreth and subcommittee members for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Kim Eisenreich, and I'm the administrator of the Howard County Local Management Board and also chair of the Maryland Association of Local Management Boards. Across Maryland, we continue to see an increase in child poverty rates, as well as our ALICE population, those who are asset limited, income constrained, and employed. In Howard County alone, those who cannot access affordable childcare, after school and summer programming, as well as quality mental health supports, is continuing to grow. With additional funding, we would be better positioned to address these gaps and, more importantly, be able to build true wraparound services and sustainable pathways for children, youth, and families to increase economic mobility. Local management boards have a huge mission to undertake, which is to meet the needs of Maryland's most vulnerable children, youth, and families during a time when these needs are growing and when the gaps in services are also growing. Whether it's addressing food insecurity, social emotional supports through after school and summer programming, workforce development, providing home visiting supports to first-time mothers, or building the capacity of our local nonprofits to help us do the work, LMBs are acutely aware of two things. $20 million across 24 jurisdictions is simply not enough, and we just can't do it alone. So we request your support of a $10 million increase to the Children's Cabinet Interagency Fund to support the work of local management boards. Thank you so much for your consideration.
Good afternoon. My name is Don Schlim, and I am the administrator for the Baltimore County Local Management Board. We currently fund 5 programs, all of which focus on behavioral health. And as Pam mentioned, the pandemic has really let loose some significant ripple effects that are affecting Baltimore County right now. Just to give you a little bit of data, in FY22, Baltimore County saw an increase of over 1,000 youth ages 0 to 17 receiving mental health treatment services within the public behavioral health system. That's medical assistance only. Also in FY22, Baltimore County saw an increase of 381 youth ages 0 to 17 accessing inpatient observation and emergency department mental health visits, and that's all payers. But I would be remiss if I didn't give you some qualitative information as to how it is affecting our actual programs in Baltimore County. I contacted each of our clinical supervisors and asked them how are they feeling the ripples of the pandemic, and this is what they had to say. Lighthouse is a community counseling clinic in the southwest side of the Baltimore County. Clinicians have seen a marked increase in anxiety disorders and in depression among children and adolescents, and a related increase in refusing to attend school and truancy, unlike we've seen in Lighthouse's history. Cognitive Behavioral Therapy Plus is a behavioral health practice model, includes 4 different specific treatments around cognitive behavioral therapy. It's offered in over 35 community clinics and school-based clinics in Baltimore County, serves over 800 children. School staff and our mental health clinicians are witnessing much more disruption in the school environment. This is evident especially in schools with students and families from low socioeconomic backgrounds who are more likely to experience significant challenges during COVID. Lack of child oversight for online schooling and general supervision because parents were more likely to have to go to their physical work site is adding to this issue. General stress because COVID-related unemployment and health issues at home occurred during the pandemic. And finally, we have a homeless youth outreach program. Unaccompanied homeless youth serves youth wherever they can be engaged across the county. Since the pandemic, many more youth than we've seen in the past 5 years, approximately 40%, are now presenting with serious untreated behavioral health disorders, forcing us to prioritize behavioral health stabilization before we can even address other identified needs. So this is what our programs are seeing every day. Sure. If we were to get additional funding, the school system has identified a specific program around young children who are presenting with serious behavioral health issues. This is due to the expansion of pre-K in Baltimore County. They've asked us to look at a specific program that addresses individuals 2 to 7 years of age called Parent-Child Interaction Therapy, evidence-based program that is specifically focused on that age group. And I'm oversimplifying it greatly, but it involves a therapist working one-on-one with parents to teach them positive parenting skills.
Thank you all for what you do. I know you're representing your colleagues across the state, and we appreciate EVA doing much more with much less. And thank you. One question, have you requested this of the governor in a supplemental budget as well?
Yes,
Wonderful.
we have made a supplemental
Thank you.
request.
Okay, any questions for the panel? Senator Jackson?
Do we have your comments in writing?
Yes, you do.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, this is I think the budget we have the most public input on, and we greatly appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have Wendy Myers from the Maryland Children's Alliance and Amy Wilkinson from Hartley House, and that's all I have signed up. Anybody else? You're separate. Okay, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Alfred and members of the subcommittee. I'm Wendy Myers. I'm the Executive Director of Maryland Children's Alliance, or MCA. MCA is the statewide chapter which serves as convener of Maryland's 24 child advocacy centers, or CACs. CACs serve child victims of physical and sexual abuse, exploitation, trafficking. CACs are currently allocated $300,000 in state funds within the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services, and I still too want to say go CAP. This translates to only $12,500 per CAC. State funding has remained flat since fiscal year 17, despite increases in costs to provide services as well as an increase in demand for services. Therefore, on behalf of Maryland's 24 CACs, I'm respectfully requesting an increase in this funding to $1.3 million annually. To give you a sense of the amount of children served, in the 5-year period between 2016 and 2021, Maryland CACs provided services to 31,955 children. In 2021, Maryland CACs served 5,474 children. And during the first half of 2022, Maryland CACs served 3,101 children, reflecting a steady increase in demand for services. Using the 2021 data, the state of Maryland funds CACs at $54.80 per child victim served. Other states such as New Jersey fund CACs at over $1,700 per child. Delaware funds their CACs at $620 per child. West Virginia funds at $536 per child. And Virginia funds $179 per child. The national average, according to the National Children's Alliance, is $269 per child. Our model is critical to serve child victims as it utilizes the multidisciplinary team approach to child abuse. All of the professionals come together in order to best provide outcomes for children and for communities. Each CAC team includes specially trained forensic interviewers, law enforcement, child protective services, family advocates, prosecutors, medical providers, and trauma therapists. This approach streamlines coordination of interagency services, increases successful prosecution of perpetrators, and minimizes trauma through therapeutic interventions. Increased state funding will mean that CACs can adequately staff and provide much needed services. It means a part-time therapist could be made full-time. This small increase in funding will have grand implications for the work that we do throughout the state. According to a study by the University of Maryland in 2021, for every dollar spent on CAC services, the state would save $663 on other services. When the state supports its child advocacy centers, it is not only benefiting economically, but also ensuring and restoring the health and safety of our children. MCA and the network of Maryland CACs are grateful for the current financial support of $300,000 annually since 2017. However, given the rise in demand for services, we respectfully request an increase, bringing the total annual state investment to child advocacy centers to $1.3 million. On behalf of our 24 local child advocacy centers, our network of multidisciplinary teams, and the children we serve, thank you so much for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much. And we do have a written testimony as well. We appreciate it. Any questions? Thank you. Okay. Ms. Wilkinson from Hartley House is our final witness today.
Good afternoon, and I apologize. I think my registration for this came like at 3 p.m. No, I'm not Amy.
Sorry, that's Amy. I'm Inga James. I'm the president and executive director of Hartley House. Sorry to throw everybody off. I want to talk about our needs in Frederick County. Hartley House is the only organization in Frederick County that provides comprehensive services to survivors of intimate partner violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, and child abuse. And by comprehensive services, I mean holistic. We provide legal representation, professional counseling, shelter, a hotline, prevention services, abuse intervention services. We provide the whole gamut to the extent that we can. But the need that we're finding is so great. And post-COVID, we increased our the number of individuals we served by 65% from pre to post-COVID, and that's not going down. And I mean, if you think about it, our budget didn't go up 65%. So we're looking at need, and we are also not able to fill a great need. We have 150 people on our counseling wait list, which includes 50 children, because we serve children age 4 and up. We also had the most bed nights in our shelter last year of any year in history. We had 15 families staying off-site in hotels because we didn't have the room for them in our own shelter. And we continue to see such a need. It's not going down. I, for one, can't predict what the trend's going to look like in the near future. I have no idea. But what we do know is the severity of the violence that we saw during COVID just blew everybody away, and it's the worst we've ever seen. One thing I do want to talk about is the fact that everybody in my community who don't know us seems to think that we're 100% grant funded. And I want to tell you that that is just so far from the truth. We have to raise $1 million every year to keep our lights on. And that includes some personnel funding that we could not support if we did not have a giving community. And so I don't want to take on any more grants, but the fact of the matter is, if we're going to grow and meet the need, we have to, because our community can only support so much. Thank you so much for understanding and listening.
Thank you very much. Did you have a specific budget request of this subcommittee or just?
No, I'm actually here supporting MCASA and MNADV.
Okay, that's very helpful to hear. Thank you very much. Any questions? Okay, thank you. All right, colleagues, there's no more witnesses on my list. I think everybody in the room's participated. So appreciate everybody being here. Again, this is the most public testimony we've had on a budget. We greatly appreciate that. Colleagues, we are off for the next 2 days, and we are back in this room on Thursday to hear Maryland Emergency Medical Systems Operations Fund, DPSCS Administration and Offices, and the Office of the Attorney General. So that's here at 1 p.m. on Thursday. And with that, we are adjourned.